Certainly, it's a huge task for the Miami Hurricanes at Florida. They've got a lot of work to do to get this win. Let's talk about the defense, David. What do you think is the biggest key for Miami's defense against the Florida offense to get this win?
Yeah, I mean, look, SDC is a line of scrimmage league. It just looks different at those position groups in that league with the body types and the talent. And so I think, to beat those SEC type teams, you have to win or at least hold your own at the line of scrimmage. So as that relates on the defensive side, I think Miami's top unit, arguably on the team, the defensive line needs to step up and be impactful, and Florida needs to feel their talent and presence. And I think, you can define how a defense wins the line of scrimmage in a lot of ways, whether that's stopping the run, whether that's tackles for loss, quarterback pressures, or straight up sacks, right? Miami's gotta be better than Florida in those areas. More of those areas than not. And look, again, coming out of camp, I think the feeling internally is the defensive line is the strength of the team in terms of position groups. Um, particularly the edge guys with Rueben Bain, of course, coming back, Akeem Mesidor, healthy and looking, according to, some of the reports I'm getting from camp, looking better than how he looked in 2022 when he was the best defensive lineman on the team that year. They've added Tyler Barron in the portal, the Tennessee transfer. He's a 40 pressure guy, 6'5", 260 type guy. Elijah Alston, productive Marshall pass rusher. So these are proven commodities that have done it at a high level, in college. And, a lot of these guys too are versatile and they can kick inside and give you those looks too in obvious passing situations. So I think those guys in particular need to show up. Miami also brought in some veteran D tackles that, I think they feel like are going to be consistent. Guys like Simeon Barrow, CJ Clark, so I think the defensive line needs to show up. You look at last year, their win over Texas A&M. It wasn't necessarily the defensive line that straight up whipped Texas A&M. It was more of like a collective defensive effort, but they certainly overwhelmed that Texas A&M offensive line. I went back and looked at the numbers, and they recorded 37 quarterback pressures in that game as a defense. And just as a point of reference, like 20 is a lot in a game. So they were getting after Connor Wegman in that game, kind of overwhelming that Texas A&M offensive line. I went back and looked at Alabama, right? That 2021 game. That was a season opener as well. The Crimson Tide had 4 sacks. Miami had just 1 sack in that game. When Miami played Florida in the season opener back in 2019, of course, Florida had 10 sacks in that disastrous game, and Miami had just 1. So again, to beat these SEC teams, I think you have to at least hold your own on the line of scrimmage. I would expect Miami to win that battle on the line of scrimmage because, again, Miami does have a lot of talent, a lot of proven production there. And I do think there's still some question marks as it relates to Florida's offensive line, particularly on the right side. So, and, one thing I think it also helps with too is assisting your, question mark group, which is the secondary. If you have a good pass rush, it certainly helps that group perform at a higher level as well. So I think, with defense, it all ties together. It all matters. But to me, that defensive line needs to look like the best position group on the team.
I think I think with what you're kind of alluding to and what you're talking about here is it's supposed to be Miami's strength. So Miami's strength needs to be at its best in a game like this. Not just that it's a defensive line, because certainly that's
Yeah.
always a key. And as you mentioned, some good points about SEC matchups. D line is always important in those ones, but this is supposed to be the unit that is going to carry this defense. And Rueben Bain is supposed to have a huge year after what we saw last year. A lot of excitement, and rightfully so. How will he perform in this big game? They need him to have a huge game in this one. They need a healthy Akeem Mesidor at his best, and I think that's great. We'll see how Mesidor's season goes if he can stay healthy. But in this one, getting him on point and really operating at a high level certainly is big. And then kind of being able to move some guys around or really rush off the edge with Barron. And you touched on Elijah Alston there. Certainly. And then up front, as you mentioned, with those two main guys with Clark and also with Barrow and where they're going to put, whether it's Mesidor, if they're going to move Bain a little bit or whatever they might do. I know Mesidor's been working there more. That's kind of the option, but they can certainly kind of do different things. That's what makes it a little bit intriguing. But I'm with you in that it's certainly a big deal, and I think it's because they are supposed to lead this defense. And as you mentioned, Florida, a little bit of question marks. There seemed like they're still kind of working through some things and trying to identify exactly who they want to go with, their top five, and where they want to put guys. So that will be very important for Miami's defense. There's no doubt about it with the defensive line and Rueben Bain, a perfect opportunity, a spotlight game for him to really shine and have a huge performance in this one.
Yes, and those are your stars, and I think Miami's just philosophically wants to build from the trenches out, right? And so, um, they went out and got those transfer players to really beef up that group. They last recruiting cycle, they signed, arguably the best defensive line class in the country. I don't know how many of those guys we're necessarily going to see against Florida, but they're kind of waiting in the wings, and they're going to be that next wave for the future. So this is kind of Mario Cristobal's identity, his bread and butter, win the trenches. And I think he would love to do it against an SEC team on the road.
And for me, and I thought about the defensive line because of things I said. Look, it's got to be a strength. So let's see it be a strength in this one. And the big time players need to step up, and have good games. Those are the ones that are supposed to lead you. And certainly they believe in their defensive line. But for me, I think it is a secondary. I think for me, for Miami to win this game, they've got to be on point. And I worry, even though I know a lot of talk with Graham Mertz and the Florida passing attack, and when you look at the numbers, they're known for not going downfield or maybe that's a lot of underneath stuff. And at times it was, right? Based on
Sure.
the numbers and when you kind of watch them. But I think that's why it's important. I hope Miami doesn't necessarily fall into that completely and think that they don't have to, that these guys are not threats or Mertz isn't a threat to throw the ball. With Badger now in there, they've got speed as well with their guys that they have. Eugene can have a bigger role than he had even last year. I
Yeah.
just think that they've got guys, and I know they're excited about Mizell, and I think that they've got guys that can make plays. And I think the secondary has to really avoid allowing big plays because of the momentum that it can kind of create in a big game like this. And I have major question marks with the secondary. I think when we talk, David, you're not saying it's a strength by any means, but for me, I just think that they really have a lot to prove. And I understand the other day I saw a comment about last year's safeties, for example, with Kitchens and James Williams. Maybe they weren't perfect, but I still think that they were quality players, and I think they're better than what they have now. And I think these guys have a lot to prove. I think Jaden Harris is going to be in a prime time spotlight to be an impact player, to make plays and not have these busts. And we'll see how Mish does, and certainly kind of leading the back at safety and in the corners. You got to guard without getting pass interference calls and holding calls back there. So I think to me that they've got to be really on point, even though Florida can still run the ball, and that'll kind of be their identity. You're kind of expecting, even regardless of who's in or out of the lineup. I just think they've got to really avoid those big plays given up, and I do think Florida can be a threat there, even though that might not be what everyone's quite thinking right now.
And look, even if we're talking about, short passing game or quick game, especially as it relates to Trey Wilson, right? Um, a big key in game ones is tackling in space. And so that's where the secondary is also going to have to show up and do a good job. To me in particular, because look, I do think that's kind of what their identity is. Now, Florida's going to take some shots, and of course, you got to handle those moments. But really, I think they're going to try and test you in space. And so you got to get the guy on the ground in space. And a guy like Trey Wilson is very dynamic, and he can hurt you if, that first tackler misses. And we saw that in the week zero games. The better tackling teams in general won those games. And so, as you know, Chris, they don't really nowadays in college football, they don't really tackle at all in camp. I think it's like an NCAA rule where you can only do it like twice in a camp. And so it is kind of an uneasy thing for all coaches going into game one because the only way you can really get good at tackling is tackling, and they really haven't been doing it much in camp. So to me, that's another area to watch, just the in space aspect, beyond just defending the deep ball, which is definitely something to keep an eye on because look, we know what Daryl Porter is. He's steady and he's reliable. And but outside of him, we'll see. I know they're high on Mish Powell, who's a Washington transfer, experienced guy, mainly played in the slot during his career at Washington, played as an outside corner too. Um, but now he's playing safety. They are excited about him. They like what he's shown in camp, but we'll see how it looks when the lights are on. And then, like you're alluding to, Jaden Harris, we don't know. So we'll find out what he's about. And then the other guy, there is a competition, I think, between Jadis Richard and a true freshman in OJ Frederique. How do they handle that? Like, what direction do they go with first as a coaching staff? And how do those guys perform when they are tested? Because Florida should go after whoever is out there at that cornerback spot. So it's definitely the question mark spot on the team. It's glaring. We'll find out whether or not those concerns are warranted because it's always just based on performance. And at the end of the day, your performance doesn't lie.
And it's not just the Florida passing game. I mean, there's just different ways that they can attack you. And I keep looking at this number. Last year, 72.3% they completed their passes. Again, it varied on different lengths, but that's second nationally. And just
Mhm.
that philosophy, you're bringing back Mertz. Again, he's a guy that to me has kind of improved steadily. I remember watching him at the high
Yes.
school level and kind of seeing how things have gone. And again, when I talk about the secondary, that can really give a lot of confidence when you have some breaks back there. You can give a lot of confidence to either the quarterback or the receivers, whatever it might be, and really juice up the crowd with those passes. So that will be the big thing I'm watching. And again, as you touched on earlier, defensive line can certainly help alleviate some of that. If they can really pressure a lot, then you don't have as much pressure on the secondary. Any final thoughts, David? Defensively, we haven't touched on linebackers. We kind of went back and forth. We went secondary, D line. Any thoughts here as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, look, linebacker, again, I point to tackling. I think you feel good about it as it relates to Kiko Maui Noah. I think he's a consistent veteran, proven production there. Wesley Bassett needs to step up, needs to take that next step this year. This is year three for him. I think everyone's encouraged by how he's performed in camp, but you got to go do it in games. And yeah, as you were touching on, Chris, Graham Mertz. I think it was like only 6 turnover-worthy plays last year, according to Pro Football Focus. So he is a guy that keeps the ball out of harm's way. And yes, while he's not the most aggressive guy, that can also be frustrating for a defense to defend because he's just paper cutting you to death down the field. So you got to be consistent and play the next play because most likely Florida style is going to be putting together long, sustained drives that wear you down both physically and mentally. So, and look, of course, the run game is going to be interesting as it relates to Montrell Johnson, and is he going to be healthy or not? Or if he is healthy, what does his workload look like? And how do the backup running backs look? Uh, to me, particularly in pass protection, right? So there's definitely a lot of interesting storylines with this offense defense matchup.
Definitely is. Thanks everybody for watching. Drop in the comments below. Let us know what you think is the biggest key for Miami's defense to win the game against Florida.